Hi guys, welcome. If you're new here, my name's Nikki. I'm a beekeeper and I make beekeeping videos. If that's something you like watching, then hit the subscribe button. If you're one of my returning subscribers, thank you so much for coming back and listening to what I have to say. I really appreciate it. Today I am going to not be filming directly with my bees. I have a lot of things that I want to film for you guys, but unfortunately we are in the middle of like a little heat wave here in the state that I'm in. Currently, I think the last time I looked at the weather, it was 91 degrees, feels like 106 with 68% humidity. It is so humid today that when I brought my camera and tripod outside, it was the temperature of my climate controlled home at 70 degrees, and as soon as I brought it outside, it completely fogged up the lens on it. So it's that humid today. So I will not be getting in and messing with the bees today, not only for my own safety and comfort, but for theirs as well. This time of year, you've got a lot of beekeepers that are doing splits, and you have a lot of hives that are swarming. Now, ideally, as beekeepers, we try to prevent that from happening, but unfortunately, we don't always do that, and we do get some of our hives that swarm. So I thought this would be a great opportunity to talk about requeening a little bit and the different ways we can do that and the pros and cons of each type of requeening. So whether you have a hive that has swarmed or you've split them yourself, you're always going to have one of those hives, the existing hive that you had to begin with, that's going to be queenless after that process. And like I said, there's a couple different ways that you can requeen that hive. The first way is that you can provide a mated queen for those bees. So you can purchase a queen unless you produce them on your own, and in that case you're probably not watching this video if you make your own queens, but you can purchase a mated queen from a bee supplier and introduce that into your hive. That I said before, that queen's mated, so it comes ready to lay. You introduce it to your hive, and then within a few days typically they start to lay eggs and you start to see brood production. The pros of that is just what I talked about. You've got a queen that you can install, and within a few days they are going to work. The cons of purchasing a mated queen is you have to purchase them, so there's a cost involved. Depending on the time of year that you're looking for a mated queen, it can be difficult to find them, and sometimes depending on your location, it can also be pretty tough. Now, I would recommend kind of networking and getting into some beekeeper groups. I know my state specifically has a Facebook group for Ohio beekeepers, and that's a fantastic place to go in and network. I see posts in there all the time of people looking for queens, and people respond pretty quickly back that they have them. So I would highly recommend you start networking on things like that to be able to have those resources available to you if you get into a situation where you want to requeen and need a new queen. The other con to buying a mated queen is sometimes your bees don't take that queen. There's really no guarantee that they're going to accept the queen. I think for me, more often than not, the bees accept a queen. It's in their best interest to keep their colony surviving and producing. I have had rare occasions where the queen's not been accepted, but that's not the majority of the time. I would recommend, if you're going to introduce a mated queen into a hive that you've split, that you give that old hive a couple days without a queen before you introduce that mated queen to them. If you do it right away, they still have the scent of the old queen in there, her brood's in there, and you have a higher chance that they're not going to accept her if you put her in right away. So definitely give yourself at least a day or two to leave them queenless before you introduce that queen. And in my opinion, always put them in a queen cage to give the bees time to get used to her scent, to her pheromone, and then see how they're responding to her. So I would not recommend just direct releasing a queen into a hive, but that's my preference. Now, the other way that a hive can requeen is if you let them requeen on their own. And if I have an existing hive that has overwintered and they're pretty strong, most of the time I'm going to let the bees requeen on their own. If you're a first-time beekeeper and you attempt this, in a few minutes I'm going to talk about a couple things that will help you in that process and maybe cause you a little bit less stress when you are letting them requeen. Whether you have a hive that remains after a swarm or whether you have a split, if there are eggs in that hive, they can make a new queen. Most of the time, if you are considering splitting your bees, they're probably already building queen cells to begin with, and that puts you at a couple day advantage. It also helps the split be a little more successful because the bees had likely intended to swarm anyways. So if you have eggs present or you have eggs from another hive that you can give to these bees that you're wanting to requeen, they can make a new queen. Now, it's not a quick process. You have about 16 days for a queen to emerge. So if you give them brand new fresh eggs, that's how long it's going to take for that egg to produce a virgin queen. And then you have a period of time, once that virgin queen is emerged or born, so to speak, they have a period of time between that point and when they take their mating flight. So again, this time kind of adds up. Where I think a lot of brand new beekeepers kind of get frustrated or are really unsure is in that time where the queen mates and they're not really sure if the queen has mated or not. So I've had some friends of mine who are new beekeepers that have done splits and they're watching and they know their queen has emerged. They see the queen in there. They go back a week later looking for eggs. They don't see any eggs. They still find the queen, but they are really wondering if that queen has mated or not. And there's a couple ways that can tell you whether the queen has mated. And I think sometimes there's a misconception that when that queen mates, she's going to come right back and start laying eggs, and that's just not the case. So once a queen bee goes on her mating flight and comes back, after she mates, there are hormonal changes that take place before she can be fully developed and be able to lay eggs. So from the time you have that queen emerge to take her mating flight, to return and come back and start laying eggs in your hive, it can be a couple of weeks, which is why it's a really kind of delicate process where you want to really pay attention in that time to make sure that you are catching your hive if they do become queenless or don't have a mated queen in there and they go too long. And at the end of the video, I'll kind of talk about what happens to your hive if they're queenless for too long. But back to whether you'll know whether your queen is mated or not, there's a couple different ways. There's no really surefire way to look at that queen to tell if she's mated or not, but there's a couple things you can notice. One of the things I learned a couple years ago from another YouTuber called Barnyard Bees, and he made a video on this, I want to say maybe 4 years ago now. So I will go back through his videos and try to find that and link that video so you can check it out. He'll go in more detail on how he noticed this. But your queen, when she takes her mating flight and she comes back, a lot of times she'll bring a pack of bees back with her, and those are not from your original hive. She just kind of picks up stragglers along the way. So if the hive that virgin queen came from is relatively small, a lot of times you'll notice that when you go in to check, there's no eggs in there, but you've got, you know, a significantly higher population in there. This is really helpful if you've got either like a 2-frame or a 5-frame nuke that you have these bees in. Now, one of my splits I did earlier in the year, or about a month ago, the hive was so big that I would not have noticed. There was too many bees in there for me to notice any increase in population. So this method only works if you have a smaller hive to start with. But again, I'll try to link that video. It's Barnyard Bees. He's one of my favorite beekeepers on YouTube. Definitely check out his videos and subscribe to him. I think he's amazing. But back to another way to tell if you have a mated queen in your hive when you don't see any eggs. One of those ways you can tell is in how the bees respond to her. So virgin queens, the bees do recognize that's a queen in the hive. They recognize her as a virgin queen, but the queens don't really get their pheromone until they've mated, until they've taken that mating flight and they've come back from it. So if you see your queen inside the hive and you're unsure if she's mated or not, put her in a queen clip and kind of put her on top of the frames and see how the bees respond to her. If you've got bees that are collecting around her and trying to take care of her, it's highly likely that she is mated and has that pheromone, and the bees are attracted to that. So that's another way that you can kind of spot to see if she's mated or not. And sometimes it just takes time. You want to give her a week or another 2 weeks to go in and really give her a chance to lay. A lot of beekeepers get really antsy. The first time they do splits, they think the queen is defective or she's not mated, and they make like a hasty decision to go in and dispatch that queen and put a mated queen into the hive. So it is nerve-wracking at first. You're not sure if this queen is mated or not, but just have patience and trust that the bees know what to do and that the queen is going to do what she's supposed to do. I've said at least once, probably twice throughout this video, that you really want to keep an eye on these bees as they're requeening, just to be aware of where they are in the process. And another reason for that is not all queens make it back from mating flights. Some of the queens get taken by predators. They will not return because of that reason. Also, you'll have queens that get confused and kind of fly into the wrong hive, especially if you have a lot of hives next to each other. That can be confusing to a new queen. And if a queen goes into the wrong hive and she's mated, they're going to recognize that pheromone in her, and they're probably going to attack her, and that queen is not going to survive. So that's a reason that your queen might not make it back in, or they might just simply get lost along the way. So it's not guaranteed that your virgins are going to come back from their mating flights. So just be in there and be aware. And I don't always look for queens during inspections on an existing hive, but I always spend extra time on hives that I'm requeening to really pay attention and see if I can see those queens in there. So let's talk about what can happen if you aren't being diligent and paying attention, or if you've got a hive that does not successfully requeen and you don't catch that in time. So typically, whether you have a swarm or a split, that existing hive is going to have some brood left in it, and you may have a couple weeks before that brood emerges. But regardless, typically you may have a period where there's no brood production. If you get a mated queen in time into the hive, you may not have that, but if you are letting the hive requeen on their own, it is a guarantee that you are going to have a gap in brood production, or a period where there's absolutely no brood in that hive. Bees require brood production to continue to grow and expand their hive. In the spring and the summer, the bee lifespan is significantly less than our fall bees, so it's necessary that they continue to make brood in order to thrive and survive and go into fall and winter successfully. Now, those couple weeks that you're broodless are not going to really make or break the hive. Typically, they can bounce back from that, but if they're given too long of a period with no brood, sometimes it's difficult for them to do that. Another thing, if you have the hive go broodless for a period of time and queenless for a period of time, you'll get into what is called a laying worker situation. The hive will recognize that they don't have a queen and they've been without one for an extended period of time, and what happens is one of the female worker bees, or sometimes multiple, will go through hormonal changes to start to develop the ability to lay eggs. So they will grow ovaries and the reproductive parts to be successfully able to lay eggs. The problem with that is those bees are not mated, so they can only make male bees. So once you have a laying worker, they're going to lay drones and only drones, and you can notice that's the case if you've got a ton of drone brood and no regular female capped brood in the hive. Also, because the female worker bees or the laying workers' bodies are not as long as the queen's, they cannot lay eggs like she does. So the queen is longer and kind of gets her butt down into that cell and lays it right in the middle. A laying worker eggs are going to be really all over the place. So they're typically not going to be directly in the center. They may be a little crooked in the cells, and sometimes you'll have 2, 3, or 4 eggs in the same cell. This is the last ditch effort at this colony to survive. If you get into a laying worker situation, it's really, really bad. I can do a whole separate video on what to do to try to fix a laying worker hive and sometimes it's not successful, but we'll do a whole other video on this because it's really, really hot out today and I'm trying to limit the amount of time that I am outside. That is kind of just a quick in a nutshell on requeening, and I hope it answered some questions for you if you are in the process of that or you're thinking about that. If you have any specific questions I did not cover, because like I said in other videos, I will film these and as soon as I get done and I get into editing, I'm like, oh, I forgot this or I forgot that. So if anything I left out that you want to add, please put it in the comments. Any questions you have, put those in there as well. As always, guys, I appreciate you so much for watching and I hope you all have a fantastic day.